He wasn't supposed to survive until the ravens chose him. The first thing he heard was the sound of wings. Not footsteps, not swords, not the screams of dying men. Just wings. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They filled the night sky like a living storm, black feathers cutting through the cold air as they circled above a battlefield that had already claimed hundreds of lives. And beneath them, buried beneath broken shields and frozen mud, a young warrior was still breathing. Barely. His name was Kale. And according to everyone who had seen the battle, Kale should have been dead. Hours earlier, his army had marched into the Valley of Ash believing they were going to win. They had 3,000 soldiers. Their enemy had less than half that number. But numbers meant nothing once the fog arrived. The first arrows came from the mountains. Then the horns sounded. Then the darkness moved. By sunset, the valley had become a graveyard. Kale remembered fragments. A sword striking his shield. A horse screaming. Fire spreading across the battlefield. His commander shouting for the soldiers to retreat. And then, nothing. When Kale opened his eyes, the battlefield was silent. The moon hung above him. Snow had begun falling. His left arm was numb. His armor was cracked. And blood covered his clothes. He tried to move. Pain exploded through his body. He collapsed again. That was when he heard them. Caw, caw, caw. Kale slowly looked toward the sky. Ravens. They were everywhere. On broken swords. On dead horses. On ruined banners. Watching him. Not feeding. Watching. One raven flew closer. It landed on the edge of his shield. Kale stared at it. The bird stared back. Its eyes were strangely intelligent. Almost human. Then something impossible happened. Every raven in the valley suddenly stopped moving. The entire flock turned toward the northern mountains. And then they flew. All at once. Kale watched the black swarm disappear into the darkness. He didn't understand what he had just witnessed. But he knew one thing. Something had noticed him. And it wasn't finished with him. Kale spent the next several hours crawling through the battlefield. He searched for water. He found none. He searched for food. Nothing. He searched for survivors. There were no answers. Only bodies. Eventually, he reached an abandoned stone road leading into the forest. Every instinct told him not to enter. The forest was known as Blackwood. Soldiers refused to travel through it. Hunters disappeared there. Travelers who entered rarely returned. And there were stories about something living deep inside the trees. Something older than the kingdom itself. Kale had always believed those stories were nonsense. That night he stopped believing. Because as soon as he entered the forest, the ravens returned. One landed on a tree directly above him. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, dozens of them surrounded the path. Kale tightened his grip around his sword. "Come on," he whispered. The ravens didn't attack. Instead, they began flying deeper into the forest. Then they stopped. They looked back, as if waiting. Kale hesitated, but he had nowhere else to go. So he followed. The deeper he walked, the colder the forest became. The trees grew taller. The fog became thicker, and strange symbols began appearing on the trunks. Symbols Kale had never seen before. Then he noticed something else. There were no animals, no wolves, no insects, no birds except the ravens. The forest was completely silent, until he heard a voice. "Why did you survive?" Kale froze. He turned around. Nobody was there. Who said that? Silence. Then the voice came again. "You were not supposed to survive." Kale raised his sword. "Show yourself." A shadow moved between the trees. Slowly, a figure stepped into the moonlight. He was tall. Far too tall to be an ordinary man. His skin was pale. His hair was long and white. His face looked ancient. Not old. Ancient. As if he had been standing in that forest for centuries. Black feathers covered parts of his armor. And behind him stood a massive stone statue shaped like a raven. Kale pointed his sword at him. "Who are you?" The stranger smiled. "I am the one who has been waiting for you." Kale's grip tightened. You don't know me. I know more about you than you know about yourself. The ravens began gathering around them. The stranger looked toward the sky. For 300 years, they have chosen no one. Kale frowned. Who? The stranger pointed toward the ravens. The ravens. Kale almost laughed. You're telling me birds chose me? The stranger's expression didn't change. They did not choose you because you are strong. He stepped closer. They chose you because you survived. Kale looked down at his blood-covered armor. I survived by accident. No. The stranger's voice became colder. You survived because something inside you refused to die. Kale didn't know what to say. Then the stranger reached into his cloak and pulled out an ancient black medallion. A raven was carved into its surface. He threw it toward Kale. The moment Kale touched it, everything changed. He saw fire, a massive army, a kingdom burning, thousands of bodies, and standing above them all was the same pale figure. But he wasn't alone. Beside him stood another warrior, a warrior wearing the same raven symbol. Kale suddenly heard a woman's voice. Find him. Then another voice. Before the king does. Kale dropped the medallion. He fell to his knees. The vision disappeared. The forest returned. The stranger was staring at him. You saw it. Kale looked up. What was that? The past. Whose past? Yours. Kale shook his head. That is impossible. The stranger smiled. Is it? Before Kale could answer, a horn sounded in the distance. The enemy had entered the forest. They had found him. Hundreds of soldiers moved between the trees. Kale stood. His body was exhausted. His wounds were still bleeding. He could barely hold his sword. The stranger simply watched. You should run. Kale looked toward the approaching soldiers. Where? Anywhere. Kale laughed bitterly. I've been running my entire life. He raised his sword. This time I'll stay. The stranger's eyes narrowed. For the first time he looked impressed. Then the ravens began screaming. The entire forest exploded with movement. Thousands of black wings filled the sky. The soldiers stopped. Some dropped their weapons. Others looked around in fear. Then the ravens attacked. They swept through the enemy formation like a black hurricane. Soldiers screamed. Horses panicked. Torches fell into the snow. And through the chaos, Kale moved. He had no idea where his strength came from. His body should have been broken. But every time an enemy approached, a raven appeared. Every time he was surrounded, the birds attacked. It was as if the entire forest was fighting beside him. Within minutes, the soldiers were retreating. Kale stood alone in the snow. His sword was covered in blood. The ravens landed around him. And for the first time, Kale understood. They weren't protecting him. They were testing him. The pale stranger approached. You have passed the first trial. Kale looked at him. There are more. The stranger nodded. 7. Kale stared into the darkness. What happens if I fail? The stranger looked toward the mountains. You die. Kale smiled. I was supposed to die today anyway. The stranger smiled back. That is exactly why they chose you. The following morning, Kale discovered something even more disturbing. The battle had not been random. His army had been betrayed. Someone inside the kingdom had deliberately sent them into the valley. And the enemy hadn't been trying to destroy the army. They had been searching for one person, Kale. The king's soldiers had been ordered to find him alive. Because the kingdom knew about the ravens. They knew about the ancient guardian. And they knew what